Good morning. Oh, you brave, brave, wonderful people who are here in the park in the rain. Oh, I'm seeing so many smiles. I just want to thank all of you for being here in the park once again. My job, it's to welcome you, but there's first one thing I've been commanded to tell you, that if anyone needs the facility, if any of us need the facilities, right there in the brick building behind me. So that task is done. The second task is joyously welcoming all of you here to this most incredible day. Thank you, Stephen Bates. Thank you, Stephen Bates. Thank you, Stephen Bates. Just for a moment, imagine more than 114 years ago, Stephen Bates walking this ground that we are all standing on. Imagine Stephen with his wife, Frances, with his daughter, Rose, and Frederick, literally walking across this park. He would have. Now I say that, but the historians of the group, they'll take issue because I can't prove it, but never mind. To think that there was this man, and this story is going to be told in such its beauty, that this man, enslaved for 20 years, made his way here to Vergennes and protected us, cared for us for more than 25 years as a sheriff and chief of police. Slavery to protection of a community, walking these grounds, walking under some of these trees. It's a rather miraculous story, and you're going to hear it. And I really want to share with you, so many of you, beautiful faces, were with all of us just 15 months ago, short months ago, mourning the death in this park of George Floyd. And we gathered on June 6, 2020, in silence, reverence, mourning the death, the murder of George Floyd. And I will say, I was so full of fear. I had no idea what was going to be the outcome of this. And then this. And what this is, the very first introduction that I want to make, which again is back in the miraculous category, is that Stephen Bates' ancestors are actually present with us today. And Larry, Skyler, under the red and white umbrella with his wife Lynn, and Nick, where are you? There he is, under the brown and white umbrella, and his wife Gail. Larry and Nick are the great-grandsons of this remarkable man, Stephen Bates. Now, this whole story is going to unfold. I'm going to go back to how this, in my world, got started. Following that moment of silence, reverence to George Floyd on June 6th, we stood, frightened, fear. When we were all done, this woman approached me and introduced herself, and we continued our conversation the very next day. And this woman said, after our conversation, Liz, I think it's time to speak. And this woman is Alicia Grandgent, who I believe, having stepped onto this very stage the very next Saturday, laid the fundamental foundations of Voices in the Park. Her courage, her fearlessness, speaking of what it was like to be a woman in Vermont, a woman living in Vergennes, totally took my breath away. I've had the great honor of getting to know Alicia as we all have worked on this project, bringing Stephen Bates to our knowledge, to our brains, to our acknowledgement. And Alicia has been an inspiration every step of the way. And I'd love to introduce you to her at this moment. Alicia, come on up.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you all for being here to celebrate this historic event with us today. It means so much to each and every one of us that are here at this time. Okay, shorty. All right. So I'm up here for a couple of things. As co-chair of this project, one of the things that I wanted to do is also recognize Elizabeth Ryan, who is the co-chair, for her incredible work that she has done. And Liz Ryan, from the time that I saw your ad in the Front Porch Forum about the event for George Floyd, I knew I had to go check out the event, and I also needed to go figure out who this woman was and what she was all about. I was leery at that time and wanted to know more about the person behind the post, and I honestly felt like 3 to 5 people would be in this park on that particular day. I obviously underestimated the superpowers that Elizabeth Ryan has. Once I got here, our conversation kind of went like this. I saw many of you, like I do today, in this park, and I began to see hope in the Vergennes community on that particular day. Fast forward, here we are today, celebrating Sheriff Stephen Bates. When Liz asked me or told me about Stephen Bates, again, I had the same amount of skepticism about who this person was, 25 plus years. How are we going to prove that? Once again, she proved me wrong. We proved each other wrong. And here we are today. If anybody knows Liz, they know that she's a very positive person and that she adds sprinkles to every single thing that she does of kindness and goodness for each and every one of us to take notes from. It's been a truly remarkable experience working with her and Bo over the course of 16 months to present this to you today. Thank you for your support, Liz, and thank you for your listening ear, and I love you. I also have quite a few special thanks for community members here that it's important to share, because we didn't do this by ourselves. Beth Awady, who's up here on the stage with us. She is from the outreach office at Senator Sanders' office. She was instrumental in getting us a congressional document. Thank you. Eloise Bill, historical research and editing on our marketing team. Thank you so much for everything. You can check out her amazing work at the Bixby Library as well. Catherine Brooks, historical marker research team. Thank you. Mike Daniels, Prospect Cemetery. Thank you for helping us to locate the marker in the cemetery. Susan Ferlin, President of the Vergennes Historical Society. Thank you for your work. Jeanette Thomas Greenwood, Professor of History at Clark University. She will be joining us today and speaking. Thank you. Catherine Hayes, Director of the Bixby Library. Thank you so much for everything. Jeff and Andrew Fritz, contributors to this wonderful dedication ceremony. Thank you so much. Cheryl Tonley Hawley, Chief of the Nipmuc Nation and a historian. Thank you very much for your contributions to this work. Jim Lero in the Vergennes Public Work Department. Thank you so much for putting up the marker, going to get it, everything. Sarah Lyman, got to see your work last night at the Bixby. Thank you so much for being a designer on our team. Lenore Morse, librarian and historian. Thank you for your contributions. Ron Redman, our city manager. Thank you for everything. Rebecca Ray, our designer of the marker logo, as well as helped set up this morning. Thank you so much for everything. Tim Ryan, contributor, and my bestie. Cookie Stepanitis, educator, contributions. Thank you. Thank you so much. The late Ann Sullivan was also a contributor to this project. May she rest in peace. Thank you. Laura Treshman, Vermont Division for Historic Preservation. Thank you so much for pushing everything through as quickly as you did and ensuring that we got here today. Thank you. Jane Williamson, historical research on our team, and great insight, and has a lot of great things coming. She's going to be speaking today. Thank you. I also have a special thank you. We had a grave marker team. They came out of nowhere. We were trying to figure out how we could fix the marker that was leaning at that particular point in time. And this group of people stepped up and helped out. They took over and did an excellent job restoring a marker at no cost to us. Special thank you to Deborah Hardy and Jim Woodman for taking on that project and making it look as beautiful as it does today. And we thank you greatly and immensely for that. And I will bring Liz back up. Thank you all.
Thank you, Alicia. So on that fateful day on June 6th, meeting Alicia, there was another woman in the audience that was the holder of the key. Bo Price has been the linchpin of bringing, whether you knew it or not, you were going to be part of this group. And it was Bo that led us forward on this. Bo is relentless in getting the facts of history correct. Not my skill, way off, yeah. This is what this woman has done, kept us so on track, so thoughtful and mindful of exactly the precise story of what we could know about this story. Bo, you've been an incredible inspiration, and it's your turn to talk.
So, good morning. Thank everyone for being here today to celebrate Vermont's first known black sheriff, Stephen Bates. It's been a really exciting time for all of us here on the historic marker team, and we're very happy to be sharing this event with you. But before I begin describing how our research team evolved over this past year, I'd like to share a few facts about Sheriff Bates. And also, I want you to know that my little speech here is going to last no more than 9 minutes. Stephen Bates was born enslaved on the Shirley Plantation in Virginia in 1842. During the Civil War, at the age of 20, Stephen escaped from Shirley Plantation and served Union officers at Harrison's Landing, the Berkeley Plantation, some short distance away. After the war in Washington, D.C., Stephen was employed as the coachman for Frederick E. Woodbridge, a Vermont congressman. Woodbridge's home was in Vergennes, where he permanently returned with Stephen in 1869 after Woodbridge had completed his term in Congress. Stephen's first election to sheriff of Vergennes was in 1879, the same year that Woodbridge was elected mayor. Over the next 29 years, from 1879 until his death in 1907, Stephen was elected sheriff in all but 6 of those years. And he also served twice after some resignations, making him sheriff of Vergennes for a total of 25 years. He was also appointed chief of police several times during this period. Woodbridge's home still stands today, directly behind me on the corner of North and Park Streets. It's this house on the corner. Since being sold from the estate of Woodbridge in 1890, this home has served as the home to clergy for St. Paul's Episcopal Church, the church on the opposite corner, right behind me. And the brick building in between these two buildings was formerly Woodbridge's law office, and it was also sold to the church in 1890 and has served as the church's parish hall since that time. Stephen himself boarded nearby at the brick home, right over there on North Street, and eventually owned his own home on North Street on property formerly owned by Woodbridge. St. Paul's is where I will start our story about how the rediscovery of Stephen Bates in Vermont started in the summer of 2019. I'm a member of St. Paul's and have done some historic research as on our membership and buildings, relying on a great deal on histories written by former members of the church, some over 100 years old. St. Paul's received an email from Larry Skyler from Oakham, Massachusetts, near Worcester, in the summer of 2019, asking if we had any information on Stephen Bates, his great-grandfather, and Rose Bates, his grandmother, who had been members of St. Paul's some years ago. After communicating with Larry a bit, I was able to find some old church records that indeed showed Stephen Bates and his family attending St. Paul's. Records consisted of baptisms, confirmations, marriages, and deaths. There were many records, including the names of Stephen, his wife Frances, and children Rose and Frederick, or Fred. Larry also shared with me that his great-grandfather had been a sheriff of Vergennes. And since Larry and his wife Lynn were planning on visiting St. Paul's, I thought perhaps I'd take a look at some online newspapers to see if I could find out anything about the sheriff. Little did I realize what I would find. There's quite a treasure trove of newspaper articles documenting the sheriff and his family from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. I think altogether the historic marker team has clipped about 100 newspaper articles documenting their time in Vergennes. We even found the 1893 wedding description of Rose Bates marrying Raymond Skyler at St. Paul's. And one of Larry's favorite clippings was that of Stephen's son, Fred, saving the rector of St. Paul's from a potential drowning incident on Lake Champlain. After Larry and Lynn's visit, my St. Paul's friends, including Lenore Morse, who had done some quick research at the Bixby Library, encouraged me to write a blog article about the visit and what had been found. And so I did, and you can still read about it at our St. Paul's website. And that's where things stayed until the summer of 2020, when a number of events converged. First, there was the murder of George Floyd, along with a summer of Black Lives Matter protests. In Vergennes, Liz Ryan gathered a vigil for George Floyd, and subsequent anti-racism workshops ensued right here in the park, called Voices in the Park. Alicia Grandgent became a key presenter and partner. Also at that time, stories about Vermont's first Black chief of police, Brian Peet, were circulating in the media. In July of 2020, Peet was sworn in as chief of police in Montpelier. And then my blog articles started being shared with Liz and others, and the next thing I knew, the Addison Independent was interested in writing a story, and they published an article in September 2020. That was the first time in recent history that Stephen Bates' story was published in a Vermont newspaper. By the fall of 2020, Alicia, Liz, myself, and Larry decided that we would like to pursue getting an historic marker for Stephen Bates in Vergennes. One by one, people came to help us who added depth and understanding. Historians, former directors of the Rokeby Museum, a former curator at the Maritime Museum, Larry's brother Nick Skyler, community members, Bixby Library officials, and many others. We called ourselves the Historic Marker Team, and we met for many months over Zoom through a long fall, winter, and spring of COVID. At some point in 2021, we discovered that our work was really a rediscovery of Stephen Bates because his story had not been entirely lost. We discovered that former Vergennes Union High School teachers Ann Sullivan, who recently passed away, and Cookie Stepanidis had taught the Stephen Bates story at the high school. They provided an oral history of Stephen Bates collected some years ago. Our own Vergennes Historical Society, through Susan Furland, was able to provide additional pieces of the story, like the discovery of Stephen and his wife's gravestone in Prospect Cemetery. In February 2021, during Black History Month, the Stephen Bates story was read into the Congressional Record. It actually occurred on my birthday, February 24th, which I found particularly meaningful. In April 2021, after applying to the Roadside Historic Site Marker Program through Vermont Historic Preservation, we were awarded an historic marker for Sheriff Stephen Bates, and here we are for its dedication and unveiling. Along the way, we discovered that Stephen Bates was famous in Vermont and outside of Vermont in his own time and afterwards. We found articles in the Boston Herald, the New York Post, the Southern Workman, and of course, Vergennes' older newspaper, the Enterprise and Vermonter. In that paper, in 1914, he was written about as Vergennes' famous sheriff. In the same paper, in 1939, a reporter writing about famous Vergennes residents at the city's 150th anniversary talked glowingly of Sheriff Bates and also wondered if there had ever been another Black sheriff in Vermont. But this history has not really survived into our own time. How many of you in the audience had ever heard of Stephen Bates? Why was he not in our Vermont history books, at least? How does a story like this get lost to time? I will leave it to the historians to take a deep dive into those questions. What I do know is that between 1907, the last year Sheriff Bates was elected sheriff, the year he died, and 2020, the year Brian Peet came to Montpelier 113 years later, Vermont has not elected another Black sheriff or chief of police. These two people frame a period in our history that invites examination. Today is a great retelling of this story for our nation, Vermont, and our city of Vergennes, but it's also first and foremost a great family story. Today we have with us 7 descendants, including Larry and his brother Nick, who've been part of our historic marker team. Their children and grandchildren are also present, along with another cousin. And of course, with spouses here to support, there are 10 family members altogether from the Worcester, Massachusetts area and Groton, Connecticut. They're Yay. They're sitting here in front of our stage. They've made the trip to honor their ancestor, Stephen Bates. And we also have with us, also from the Worcester area, Cheryl Tony Holly, whose ancestor was a sister of Stephen's wife, Frances Mason Bates. Frances, along with 2 other Mason sisters, came from Elizabethtown, New York, and married men in Vergennes, 2 of whom had the last name Storms. That's a whole different story, which I don't have time to describe today. But I would encourage all of you who are interested to visit the Bixby Library for more information on all of these families. Starting Tuesday, October 5th, the Bixby opens a wonderful exhibit featuring Stephen Bates' life and legacy. A big shout out to Bixby volunteer Eloise Beal for bringing this exhibit to life. In addition, the library will showcase the Stephen Bates collection under notable collections at the library's website. One last thought. Worcester, Massachusetts keeps coming up in my remarks today as well, and that is actually where this rediscovery of Stephen Bates begins, a few years before Larry's visit to St. Paul's. Although some in Larry's family remembered learning about Sheriff Bates many years ago, for Larry it was more like family lore growing up. It was actually a history professor, Jeanette Greenwood of Clark University, who was able to piece together this information for his family through another amazing discovery of Black history in Worcester, Massachusetts, which she will be describing next. This information sparked Larry's further interest and his visit to St. Paul's and Vergennes in the summer of 2019. So with that, I will let Jeanette continue the conversation with a brief introduction from Alicia. Thank you.
Yes, we are honored today to have Dr. Jeanette Greenwood with us to discuss the Stephen Bates historical pieces that she brings to the table. Jeanette is the professor of history of Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. She connected with Larry Skyler concerning his ancestors and rediscovering an American community of color. The photographs of William Bullard from 1897 to 1917, a special project of Clark University and the Worcester Art Museum in Massachusetts. Please put your hands together and welcome Miss Jeanette, Dr. Jeanette Thomas Greenwood.
All right, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here today. There's a beautiful blessing from the Jewish faith that I've been thinking about as I've anticipated today's events. It's called the Shehekeyanu, and it is the blessing for beginnings. It's an expression of gratitude for a new or special occasion, and it goes like this. Blessed are you, our God, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and brought us to this season. In short, thank you for bringing us to this day. The blessing prompts us to give thanks and reflect upon all that has led to a moment like this of celebration. And as you've already heard from Bo, the contributions of so many people converge to make this day possible. I'm here to tell you about a series of chance happenings that led us initially to Stephen Bates, to Larry, and for me to Larry and Nick, and they start with this beautiful portrait here to my right. In early 2014, Frank Morrill, who is a retired history teacher and collector, contacted me. He thought I might be interested in a recent discovery that he had made. In 2003, Frank purchased a collection of 5,400 glass negatives, the life work of William Bullard. Bullard was a white photographer who lived in Worcester, Mass., and through the course of his career, between 1897 and 1917, photographed just about anything of interest to him, including streetscapes and local businesses. Frank had reproduced many of these images and published several books of Bullard photographs. As he worked on a book with his 10-year-old granddaughter, she pulled a glass negative out of a box that had been marked streetscapes that looked different. Hannah held it up to the light and asked, "What's this?" Frank took a look and realized that it was a portrait of a black woman. Busy with their project, they put the image aside, but Hannah's interest had been piqued. Returning to the negative, she noticed a tiny number etched into the corner of the plate. Then Frank made an auspicious connection. When he purchased the Bullard collection, the photographer's logbook had been included. Could there be a link between the numbers and names listed in the logbook? When Frank looked up the number, there was a name, and he had found the Rosetta Stone of his collection. Now he and Hannah began a thorough search of the negatives. While Frank had been aware of the portraits in the collection, he hadn't paid a lot of attention to them, as he assumed that they were people who could not be identified. But now he had the key. When Frank contacted me in early 2014, he just found over about 200 portraits of people of color, both black residents of Worcester and people of both mixed Native American and African American heritage. I was astounded when he showed them to me, and even more astounded when he showed me the logbook. We immediately got to work researching the people in the portraits, tracing them backward as well as forward to present-day descendants. We set about contacting families about our discoveries and began working with the Worcester Art Museum, where we mounted an exhibition in 2017 of 80 of the Bullard portraits. One of the portraits I researched was this one, Raymond, Skyler, and his children, taken around 1904. Probably a day in Elm Park, a snowy day where you see him sitting on a sled with several of his children. Raymond was married to Rose Bates, Stephen Bates' daughter, who was the mother of these children. Through various contacts in the community, I got Larry Skyler's phone number and told him I had a photograph that he might be interested in. I met with Larry and his brother Nick at a local cafe, and I was thrilled to share this image with them and grateful to them in turn to learn more about the people in the portrait. I was also excited to share with them some information that I had found in researching this photograph. It included several newspaper accounts of Stephen Bates' career as sheriff, as well as an obituary from the Middlebury Register from 1907 that recounted his life. I emailed the articles to Larry and Nick after our meeting, and I thought the Stephen Bates story was fascinating and important, and thought it'd be interesting at some point to follow up on because it seemed very unusual to me. But with an exhibition deadline pressing, I had to move onward to researching other portraits. But thankfully, the research did not end there. The clippings sparked Larry's memories of family stories about his great-grandfather, Sheriff Bates, stories he'd heard as a teenager, and these stories inspired him to research further, ultimately leading him here to Vergennes. Members of this wonderful community embraced Larry and the Stephen Bates story as a vital piece of their history. The marker that will be unveiled today is a culmination of that hard work. The story of recovering this piece of American history, and somebody's really rediscovering it, reminds us how fragile our history is. Stories get lost, and so much has been lost, especially in the history of people of color. Sometimes this loss comes through neglect or erosion of memory through generations, lack of documentation, and even intentional erasure. As writer Clint Smith put it, for Black Americans, quote from him, "We search what often cannot be found. We mourn for all we do not know." But today we celebrate what has been found and what we do know, the extraordinary story of Stephen Bates, Vermont's first known black sheriff. It's a story recovered in part by sheer luck, a young girl spotting a tiny number on a glass negative, the survival of a photographer's logbook, but more importantly, the story of Stephen Bates will now be known because of the determination of the Skylers, intent on honoring their great-grandfather, and a dedicated community group intent on making sure that this story will have a permanent place in Vergennes, Vermont, and the history of the United States. Thank you for bringing us to this day.
Thank you, Jeanette. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Jane Williamson. Many of you know Jane, longtime director of our very own Rokeby Museum. Jane is presently writing an article about Stephen Bates for the Vermont History, the Journal of Historical Society. Jane is recognized as a leading expert in Vermont's African-American abolitionist and Underground Railroad history. What astounds me about Jane is she likes going into the vault in the city hall and spend hours going through records that are over 200 years old? Yeah. Meet Jane Williamson.
Liz, I once said I wanted to get an apartment in the North Carolina State Archives and just live there. Okay, I want to start by thanking the group of amazing women who have worked so hard over more than a year on this project. I was privileged to join them last year, and I hope that everyone in Vergennes appreciates just how special they are. I had previously worked on researching African Americans throughout Addison County, so it was a treat to come back to that work with a focus on one man, Stephen Bates. Stephen Bates was born enslaved on Virginia's Shirley Plantation in 1842, where he lived with his mother and siblings. His father, Napoleon Bates, was enslaved on a nearby holding, but Napoleon was a skilled carpenter and was hired many times to work at Shirley, so the family was relatively intact. We've learned quite a bit about Stephen's life in slavery thanks to voluminous plantation records. They show that Stephen and his older brother William were singled out for personal service to the Carter family at quite a young age, when Stephen was just 8 years old. William was later identified as a house servant, and a 1905 newspaper article said that Stephen was trained as a waiter, but, quote, has followed that employment but little. His later service as a coachman and other jobs managing horses suggests to me that he may have worked in the Shirley Plantation stables. That's one of many unknowns. The Civil War landed on Stephen Bates's doorstep just as he approached adulthood. 1 year after those first shots were fired at Fort Sumter in April 1861, tens of thousands of U.S. troops landed on the Virginia Peninsula and went to battle in what was essentially Shirley Plantation's backyard. By early July, the Union Army had retreated to a base camp at Harrison's Landing, a mere 5 miles from Shirley. And Shirley itself had been commandeered as a Union hospital. Both sides had suffered heavy casualties, and Stephen Bates no doubt helped with the huge job of doctoring the hundreds of wounded soldiers who were in the buildings, out of the buildings, and all over the lawn at Shirley. His obituary tells us that he worked for a Union officer. Perhaps it was one of those whose bandages he changed. The Shirley Plantation Journal for July 14, 1862, noted that, quote, 15 Negro men and boys ran off. One of those 15 was Stephen Bates. Stephen was just 20 years old, but soon had another wrenching decision to make. The Union Army was being recalled to Washington, D.C., and began moving out by mid-August. Working behind Union lines 5 miles from home was one thing. Marching away from that home for good was quite another. Did Stephen discuss it with his parents and siblings? Or did he slip away without their knowledge? Did they urge him to stay or plead with him to go? However he made his decision, Stephen Bates left when the Union Army retreated in August and was soon in Washington, D.C. His time there was brief but significant. It was where he connected and went to work for Frederick E. Woodbridge, a representative from Vermont. Woodbridge was born and raised in Vergennes and followed his grandfather and father into both the law and a distinguished career in public service. Though not a radical abolitionist, he was staunchly anti-slavery and had close ties to many of the black families in Vergennes. Stephen Bates worked for Woodbridge as a coachman, and when Woodbridge's term in Congress was up, returned with him to Vergennes. Here in Vergennes, Stephen Bates found a home. He was one of 8 African Americans living in white households in 1870, another of whom was Frances Mason, a young woman working as a cook. They married in 1871 and had 2 children, Frederick Napoleon and Rose, both of whom graduated from Vergennes High School. Eventually, Stephen and Frances owned their own home on North Street. And when that house was severely damaged by fire in 1880, neighbors raised a fund of about $100 as, quote, a token of their esteem and sympathy. Bates joined St. Paul's Episcopal Church, where he sang in the choir. In other words, the Bates family was part of the Vergennes community. Coaching for Fred Woodbridge was not full-time, so Stephen Bates worked various jobs. His occupation was listed as general work and laborer on the census. Then, in March 1879, he ran for and was elected city sheriff, a post he would be reelected to all but a handful of times until his death in 1907. A month later, the city council appointed him chief of police, another post he held for many years. Our research group has wrestled with this question a lot, and don't fall off your chairs, ladies. I am prepared to say that Stephen Bates was the first black sheriff elected in a northern state. Let's stop and think a minute how utterly unlikely that was. The United States was still recovering from the Civil War and working out what sort of country it would be. Reconstruction, the effort to bring free people into full citizenship, had been abandoned in 1877. Slowly, white Northerners and white Southerners were burying the hatchet, and they were doing it over the backs and dead bodies of African Americans. White supremacy was figuring out how it was going to survive without slavery. In other words, it was not an auspicious time for a black man to be elected sheriff of a white city, even a really little one. Stephen Bates was a remarkable man, and so in many ways were the citizens of Vergennes. Together, they did something entirely out of step with the times. A Vergennes resident who remembered Stephen Bates noted that he was, quote, the complete package. He was a tall man with a firm handshake and a distinguished hat, who mingled easily with folks at every social level. Lest we think that all Vergennes residents were without prejudice, the oral history also says that when, quote, someone would bait the racist hook, Stephen never swallowed it. So it is right and fitting that we remember and honor Stephen Bates with this marker. But I hope we do more. The issues Stephen Bates faced back in 1879 remain with us today, and this is the most important thing. We have the power to do something about it. We actually do. Just ask the women who got this marker installed. As Margaret Mead famously said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. I believe I'm looking at a group of thoughtful, committed individuals here this morning. So let's take this story to heart and let it inspire us to continue the work of racial justice and healing.
I really wasn't expecting. Surprise. So, fun fact, one of the things that when they stated the dates of Stephen being here in Vermont, I had stated My textbooks say 1966. So if you're telling me that that was the first, okay. So going back, when she talked about the first, they were able to locate individuals in southern regions of the country that had been elected as African American chiefs, but still hadn't found any in Vermont and the surrounding areas of the northern hemisphere. So I had suggested, I recall, that he may be the first in the northern area, and could we do some more research? But we'll leave that up in the air for everybody else to locate that information. We've done our part with this, and thank you. Also, fun fact, our team never really had great debates, surprisingly, with all of the historians, but we did have meaningful conversations about how things could have possibly went, and always came to the solution of agreement regardless. So that's always been a great thing with the entire team, so thank you all. Next up, we have our very own Vergennes City Manager, Ron Redman. We want to thank Ron for all of his support. He came into Vergennes, I believe it was November of 2020. January, okay. And just has really been a go-getter, very positive person that has really helped us to mold this together. He gets credit for the media team today. Thank you, Chris Spencer, Ken French, Chase, for being here today to live stream as well. So thank you very much for that. And just been an avid supporter of our work overall, and we really greatly appreciate that, Ron. So please welcome Ron Redman to the stage.
Yeah. It's funny, with COVID, you're not sure whether to hug or to whatever. Thank you all for coming here. I'm going to make this short. I am honored to be able to be of service to you. I know that my team feels the same way. I want to shout out to Jim Laro. Jim, is that you over there? Who helped install the marker. I'm blessed with a great group of people who are very committed to you, to this city, and to all that we can be, all that we are, and all that we can be. It's interesting being an outsider and parachuting in and joining since January. I am amazed, Liz, Bo, Alicia, the capacity that Vergennes residents have is remarkable. You are remarkable, and you have done great things, and you will do great things. And I want us all to imagine what can this day transform into? How can we take this opportunity with Stephen Bates and really embrace it and integrate it into our community in a way that that really does wonderful things. And to the Bates descendants, to the families, to the Skyler family, welcome. It's so great to have you, and you're always welcome. You're like, this is your home, so come see us and let us know when you come. Like, give us a heads up, call my office, and because it'll be important for us to know that you're here. I also want to shout out Jill Harder from Vergennes Finest. Vergennes Police Department is back there, keeping an eye on us. Thank you, Jill. Our chief, family first, I told him, but he had an issue with his family, with his son that he had to address, and so was regretful that he couldn't be here, but wanted to just connect and say, as Vergennes police officers, my officers and I pledge to carry on and continue fostering the same relationship started so many years ago by Stephen Bates with those who live, visit, or work in our city. Thank you, Chief Bates, for your services to our community. Your legacy lives on. God bless you, and may you rest in peace. And I can't think of a better way to close. Thank you so much for showing up today. And thank you for this great team. Liz, you are, it is sparkles, but it's also a lot of substance. And it's great to have you in our community. And also want to shout out to my friend Curtis Reed from Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity, who really masterminded the African American Trail here in Vermont. So it's great, just great to have all these wonderful people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron. So our very own Representative Diane Lamphere has something quite remarkable to read to all of you. And I'm just going to hand it right over to you, Diane. This comes from the state of Vermont.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah. House Rep Diane Lamphere. Go girl.
Thank you. And with us also this morning is the Senator of Addison County, Senator Ruth Hardy. So I'm your House Rep and the Senator. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this. There is a lot of sparkle and there's a lot of substance, and I'm glad to be here with you. As I began to read about Sheriff Stephen Bates and his incredible life story, it occurred to me that his story was relatively unknown to much of the current Vergennes residents, including myself. If it had not been for the efforts of his descendants to come and visit Vergennes a few years ago, and to the connections made with the citizens in the area, Vergennes and all of Vermont may not have known this incredible, extraordinary life story. So thank you. But on behalf of all of Vermont, we're here to say thank you to you, and I hope that more connections to our history comes forward. And in recognition of this occasion, the state of Vermont Executive Department has a proclamation to share, and it reads as follows. Whereas in 1842, Stephen Bates was born, enslaved in Virginia, and gained his freedom through serving the Union soldiers. Well, maybe I went over my time. Should I wait?
I think it's still working.
Okay, there we go. I'll just start. Whereas in 1842, Stephen Bates was born, enslaved in Virginia, and gained his freedom through serving with Union soldiers during the Civil War, and whereas in 1866, Stephen Bates came to Vermont with Congressman Frederick E. Woodbridge and settled in Vergennes, and whereas Stephen Bates was elected sheriff and appointed chief of police in Vergennes in 1879, becoming Vermont's first known elected black sheriff and chief of police, and whereas Stephen Bates served as chief sheriff of Vergennes for 25 years until his death in 1907, and whereas Stephen Bates's life and service represents immense perseverance, overcoming enslavement to become a prominent member of the community in Vermont, and dedicating his life to serving the people of Vergennes. And whereas the work of the Vergennes residents and descendants of Stephen Bates has led to commemorating Stephen Bates's life with a historical marker in Vergennes, now, therefore, I, Philip B. Scott, Governor, proclaim October 3rd, 2021 as Sheriff Stephen Bates Day in Vermont. So, thank you again, and I am very pleased, we're very pleased to be with you today. Thank you.
So next up we have Curtis Reed. Curtis will be, is from the African American Heritage Trail, and he's the founder of the African American Heritage Trail. So we'd like to welcome him to the stage to discuss next steps.
Indulge me for a moment. I'm going to ask you, how are you doing? And in your most exuberant self, Don't hold back. I want you to say, I'm looking good and I'm feeling good. So how are you doing today? Thank you. Every time I asked my father that question, he'd say, I'm looking good and feeling good. And he knew that a conversation or encounter that started with a smile on your face held the promise of possibility. Thank you for indulging me in the memory of my late father, who died in 2019, just a few days short of his 91st birthday. But I'm not here to talk about my dad. The Vermont African American Heritage Trail is an assemblage of 30 sites around the state of Vermont. We created the trail to attract travelers and visitors of color and those of cultural tourism to come and visit the state, just to give them a reason to come to Vermont. We needed to let them know that there was history here that was unknown to them and unknown to most of the country. There's there are two parts of the trail. The first part is we're created to teach Vermonters, Vermont children, about the history of Africans who were here since the 1640s. We have another part of that, which is, again, promoting visitorship to the state of Vermont. We just printed 75,000 new brochures. Unfortunately, the Stephen Bates marker didn't make the cutoff. But this marker, there are two markers in Windham County that will be included in the update. But as of now, officially, the Stephen Bates marker, historic marker, is part of the trail. It's just not visible in our materials yet. Also simply related to the second mission of attracting people here, we want you to know that bigotry is bad for business. that you know, ignorance breeds bigotry, and bigotry is bad for business. So, you know, as our communities continue to struggle with the idea of a multiracial democracy and a multicultural economy, just keep that in mind, because bigotry will repel folks from Vergennes. And so we really hope that the ongoing work of Alicia and others around town bear fruit that says to the rest of the world, welcome to Vergennes. We have a lot to teach you about African-American history in the state, but we also have a lot to teach you about what it means to function effectively in a multiracial democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. Next up, we have outreach representative from Bernie Sanders' office, Beth Awady. I connected with one of Beth's teammates, and she passed along the message to Beth to please call me. I wondered how long that was going to be. It was very quick, actually. And from the first phone call, I could tell that Beth understood the assignment. She suggested a congressional document after hearing about the research and evidence located, and Beth joined our Zoom group in January of 2021. At that time, I felt emboldened to ask for the document to be here for Black History Month in February at a tall order. She delivered on that order. We received that document. Yes, please. She delivered on February 24th with the congressional document on Bo's birthday, which was unplanned, but it worked out great in that avenue. this day also. So at this time, we'd like to welcome Beth to the stage to present the congressional document to the descendants, Larry and Nick. If they would come up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this rainy day. Not only does this congressional record represent Stephen Bates as really a national figure, but we also are looking forward to the future. And the congressional record, I'm not going to read it, but it does highlight a lot of his accomplishments and his dedication as a sheriff and chief of police in Vergennes, and we heard a little bit about his story, but I encourage you to learn more. But I am very honored on behalf of U.S. Senator Bernard Sanders of Vermont to represent this congressional record to Larry and Nick Schuler, the great-grandsons of Stephen Bates.
And at this time, we will allow Larry to give a few words. We love you, Larry. No, actually, go for it.
First of all, I want to thank Bo and Jeanette for this to happen. And to give you an idea of how important this was really going to be, when Jeanette called me and said she may have a photograph of one of my relatives, I told her point blank, don't do it on Thursday, that's my golf day. She reminded me of that yesterday, so this should give you an idea where my brain was at that time. But since that time, this thing has evolved to the point where I am extremely humbled by all this information. And going through this process, the people in Vergennes, this is not just about an African-American story. This is American history, period. In today's divided day and age, why is it an individual who gets shot breaking into the Capitol is more patriotic than a person like Stephen Bates? What is wrong with this picture? That being said, those individuals are called patriots. I didn't realize we had so many patriot fans. And let's face it, the true Patriot fans tonight are going, I hope Tom Brady gets beat. Who knew? But what has happened over the years, it's a symbiotic relationship. This is just about the people of Vergennes as it is about my great-grandfather, because they together made it happen, not individually. And this is a microcosm of how we should live as a country and helping each other. I'm going to tidy up with one thing. Seeing how my great-grandfather was a true Christian, his legacy is very similar to the parable of the mustard seed. It grew, and look where we are today. And his legacy as a Christian will live on, because even though it seems minor at the time, but he died helping his neighbor. Of course, people say, well, geez, he was milking a cow. That's not the point. he was helping his neighbor. And that is the legacy that my family lives on. I want to thank the people of Vergennes for making this happen.
I just have a few, very, very few words. When I look out at the crowd of this year, and I say, these are my neighbors. Being a Christian, second commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself. And I love the staff. I love these people I Zoomed with for the past 18 months. And I'm very, very glad to be here among all you people, all you fine people who invited us to come to your town to help celebrate my grandfather and my great-grandfather. And it all started on the second floor near Clark University when we first saw this picture. And it's gone on ever since. So thank you very much for coming out in the rain. And we're glad that you're all here, and we're glad that we're here to help us all celebrate Stephen Bates. Thank you.
Next up, we'd like to welcome Reverend Sherry Osborne for a blessing.
You don't have to touch that. It's on. It is my honor to stand with you this day, to invoke a blessing. So, a brief word about blessing. It is not just a religious thing. It's a form of grace, grounded deep within our souls, kindled by the source of all creation, all love. Whatever that means for you. A blessing is a soulful kindness, compassion, and healing. There are no limits to blessing. By our very presence together this day to honor, learn, remember, we have the power to be blessing. Because of all that has been shared and embraced today, blessing has already begun bubbling up inside each of us, all of us. This blessing can signal the start of a journey of transformation. May it be so. So immediately following the blessing, we will move from this space to that space where the marker is. And so we stand upon a threshold, right here, where you stand and where I stand. We stand upon a threshold today. Thresholds can be uncomfortable, a place of unknowing uncertainty, and thresholds are pregnant with blessing, invitation, and promise. So after I offer the blessing, I invite us to hold silent as we cross this threshold and move to that space. To hold silence and consider what blessing, what invitation, what promise is bubbling up within you, which you will choose to pursue, to follow in the days to come. May we bring our whole selves to this blessing as we move. May our walking and blessing become one. O gracious source of all creation, may all who stand before you and pass by this marker learn, remember, and witness to the life and service of Stephen Bates as sheriff, chief of police, son, husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, neighbor, Vermonter. May this marker remind us of all African Americans and people of color who escaped enslavement, fought in wars, and broke down barriers. May their lives inspire us to move from any indifference or complicity to a desire to seek out other stories, stories of African Americans in this city and throughout Vermont. May we indeed lift our voices and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty for all. May our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies, resounding, loud, loud as the rolling sea. May we sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us, a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. May we face each rising sun in humility, courage, and commitment till victory is won. May these words be more than words. May our walking and blessing become one. May it be so.
I just want to say one last thing before I go. To really fully understand the impact of Stephen Bates and the relationship that he had with Fred Woodbridge, $10,000 was put up as a bond for Stephen Bates to run for sheriff back in 1879. Of course, we don't have any real documentation, but one thing's for sure, he did not sit on a street corner collecting money. Freddie Woodbridge, who at that point in time was one of the wealthiest individuals in the state of Vermont, and I really want to thank him for making all this happen, because $10,000 in 1879 was a lot of money. Thank you for your indulgence.
At this time, I would like for Chief of Police of Montpelier, Mr. Raymond, to escort Larry and Nick over to the marker. Thank you.
Yes, Brian Pete.
Brian Pete.
Brian Pete.
I didn't realize that I was supposed to present Brian Pete was going to unveil this plaque in commemoration, like I said, not only of my great-grandfather, but everybody in Vergennes. Like I said, I can't emphasize it even more. This has been a symbiotic relationship in which everybody has prospered. Hopefully, this seed will grow in the future.
Hopefully.